State Representative John Kavanaugh recently introduced a bill that would greatly restrict the video recording of police officers in public. The bill sets an 8-foot limit for such recordings. Earlier today, Representative Kavanaugh debated the merits of the legislation with K.M. Bell from the Arizona ACLU. I want to thank you both for joining us on Arizona Horizon as we look forward to a good debate, spirited debate. Representative Kavanaugh, we'll start with you. Restricting the recording of law enforcement activity. Why is this a good idea?
Sure. I was a cop for 20 years. I made a lot of arrests, sometimes tense street situations. So I know what goes through a police officer's mind when they're doing law enforcement. And everybody carries a video camera called a cell phone. And a lot of people tape cops when they're doing encounters. And some organized groups even follow cops around and tape the encounters. And I fully concede that there's a constitutional right to do that. But I'm trying to balance the person who's filming this' constitutional right to document the encounter with safety considerations and law enforcement, like evidence preservation considerations of the police officer. Nobody walks up to a cop when he's questioning a suspicious person or arresting somebody and stands 1 or 2 feet away. Common sense says you're asking for trouble. You're either going to be mistaken for an accomplice, and the cop might turn around to attack you, or you'll distract the cop, even if you are perfectly innocent. And as the cop's looking at you, the perpetrator might hit the cop, escape, or discard evidence, which, by the way, happened to me on several occasions in my police career. So police officers said, hey, can we get some reasonable parameters? I confess, initially I said 15 feet, closer indoors to get around a wall. That probably was too far and not really constitutional. Based on what people said to me in committee hearings the last time I ran this bill, things people emailed me, interview with the ACLU, I made massive changes. I went from 15 feet to 8 feet, which conforms with a U.S. Supreme Court ruling about how far abortion clinic protesters have to be from people entering and leaving the clinic. Somebody said, why can't a person videotape his own encounter? I said, there's no good reason. In fact, it's probably safer for the cop for somebody to be doing like this. I said, okay. Somebody said, why can't people in a car videotape the interaction with a driver? I said, safer for cops. I mean, hands up instead of down. So I made these concessions, and the other big concession I made was I limited the application. It was too broad. It covered all police activity. I now only have it dealing with dangerous police, potentially dangerous activity like arrests, summons, questioning suspicious people, handling the motion to disturb people.
Okay, that's a lot to cover here. Why is that not such a good idea?
It is a lot to cover, but I'm going to start with the Supreme Court case that Representative Kavanaugh referenced, because I think it's a really important point. That case was Hill versus Colorado, and there are 3 very important differences between the law that was upheld by the Supreme Court in Hill versus Colorado and this bill. The first of those is that law contained a knowingly requirement. So you only violated it if you were knowingly within 8 feet of somebody. Now, I don't know what your experience during the pandemic was, but my experience was that average people have very different ideas of what 6 feet looks like in practice. And so that's a concern, that someone violates it inadvertently, an officer walks in, or they just don't realize how close they are. The second difference between Hill versus Colorado and this bill is that law allowed someone to stand stationary. So if you're standing in one place recording and an individual walks towards you or happens to walk by you, you're not violating the law. Under Representative Kavanaugh's bill, and this is one of the biggest problems with it, if you're recording a group of officers conducting a wrongful arrest, they don't want you recording them. All they have to do is one officer comes towards you, and once they get within 8 feet of you, now all of a sudden you're violating the law and they can arrest you and stop you from recording in that way. And then the third difference is the law that the Supreme Court upheld only applied within 100 feet of the entrance to health clinics. And the reason for that was that the courts were trying to balance the constitutional right to seek abortion care under Roe versus Wade as a private woman versus the constitutional right of anti-choice protesters to make their voices heard in objection to that. Here, it's a different situation because police officers, when they sign up to be police officers, the Supreme Court has actually held that they are expected to abide by a different standard, that they are supposed to have thicker skins and be more resilient to criticism and observation than your average citizen is.
I want to go back. I want to go to the part about a cop could literally just walk close enough, get past that limit, and all of a sudden, all bets are off. That has to be a concern, does it not?
That is not an issue, because I deal with specific cases, handling suspicious people, summoning, arresting people, handling emotionally disturbed people, okay? If a cop suddenly starts walking towards people in the area, he's not doing any of those things, and it doesn't apply. It only applies to the potentially dangerous law enforcement action that is the focus. And if I can quickly comment, look, there are other decisions like Schenke, right, which clearly state that 8 feet is reasonable in these abortion cases, right? But however, I think you can even go closer. You could probably go 15 based on their ruling, because in police situations, there's a possibility of danger, whereas in those cases, it was purely the right to communicate a message.
Why not put some sort of limit there just in terms of safety?
Well, there already are a lot of tools in officers' toolbox to address situations where an individual is actually causing a distraction or an interference. For example, you can ask the person to move if they're blocking your way, someone needs to get through, but you cannot ask them to stop recording. If the person is making a disturbance, for example, they can also be arrested for disorderly conduct. And we know that the current laws are sufficient because there are multiple police departments, including the Tucson Police Department, that already have written policies that explain to officers how to comply with the First Amendment while at the same time performing their duties.
Well, I would ask this. Is it interfering if somebody walks 1 foot behind a police officer who is in the process of arresting somebody? Would that be interfering? Because if you're going to allow that, you're asking for a dangerous problem. And most reasonable people would never get that close. So is that interfering?
Well, if you're within the distance where the officer is physically moving around, within conversational
You're 1
distance,
feet behind the officer.
that is a different situation, but that is not what
You're
this
1
bill
foot
does.
behind the officer. Would that be illegal? Is that interfering and illegal? Or would you allow people, literally, when a cop is frisking or searching somebody, to stand a foot behind them and watch or photograph? Would you let that happen?
Again, the test is not a distance-based test. It is a test of whether or not the person is interfering.
Is that interfering?
And in fact, the Supreme Court has struck down distance-based limits where it was impossible to comply with them in the specific situation. For example, where there was a very narrow sidewalk, you couldn't comply with the 15-foot limit.
Well,
Is 1 foot behind interfering?
Your question is a general question. Would it not depend on the situation? And does this bill not disallow for that kind of dependency?
This bill doesn't even get into that, because this bill says when it's a dangerous situation, you need to keep back 8 feet so there's no confusion. So the cop doesn't get jumped by somebody who's a friend of the person being arrested, or the cop is not distracted. And by the way, 8 feet is very close. The cameras that are looking at us right now are 8 to 10 feet away. They're not having a problem taking a picture of us. And in fact, from 8 feet, the person probably is getting a larger view of the scene instead of just a body part, and there's more context, and it tells a better story.
So bottom line, from your position, there should be no limits.
Well, you have to look at the fact that this is a fundamental right under the First Amendment. And officers, when they become officers, take an oath to uphold the Constitution, which, by the way, includes the First Amendment. Now, certainly you could argue that, it would be easier for me if no one was allowed to record me. I'm sure it would be easier for police officers to do their duties if they could walk up to anybody they wanted and search them at any time. But they can't, because that's not allowed by the Constitution.
The bill doesn't do that. So
she's using an analogy here. But last question. The critics say, and we're running short on time here, but the critics say that this can protect and will protect bad cops. How do you respond to that?
Just as you could see me at home, 8 feet camera away, and you could probably zoom in even closer. This does not stop the scene. It makes it better because you get bigger context from the scene. This protects everybody. It protects the cop. I can't believe people think they have a right to get within 1 foot of a dangerous encounter. It's insane.
It just simply makes a tough situation safer because it doesn't have that much interference and disturbance. Last point. Respond to that.
Well, again, there are already policies in place by the International Association of Chiefs of Police, by the Tucson Police, that balance the clear constitutional rights. It is clearly established that you have a constitutional right to record police, and any time, place, and manner restriction must comply with 3 specific criteria in order to be constitutional. This bill fails on all 3. It's not narrowly tailored. It doesn't leave open enough alternate channels of communication in every situation, and it gives too much discretion to the officer.
We have to stop it right there. We could go quite a bit longer. Representative John Kavanaugh, Campbell, Arizona, ACLU. Thank you both. Good discussion. Good to have you here.
Okay.
Thank you so much.